I was already sitting on the porch when the developer's truck turned onto my road. I had a cup of coffee in my hand, still warm. The morning was quiet, just the sound of the fields, the way they've always sounded. And I watched that truck come closer, and I didn't move, didn't rush, didn't raise my voice, because I didn't need to. By the time that man stepped out of his truck with his folder full of papers and his confident smile, everything I needed to do had already been done. Weeks ago, quietly, without a single argument. My son-in-law was standing right beside him, chest out, ready to make a deal on land that he believed, truly believed, was already his to sell. He had no idea what he was walking into, and I just sipped my coffee. Before I tell you what happened that morning, I want to take a breath and speak to you directly for a moment. If you've ever felt dismissed in your own family, if you've ever watched someone underestimate you and had to decide whether to react or respond, stay with me. This story is for you. If it moves you, if it makes you feel something, hit the like button and subscribe, because I'm going to walk you through every detail of what happened, and I promise you, the ending is worth waiting for. And while you're watching, drop a comment. Tell me where in the world you're watching from. Tell me, what would you have done in my shoes? I genuinely want to know. Some of the answers from people like you have been the most honest things I've ever read. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. My father built that farmhouse in 1967. He built it with his own hands, over 3 summers, using wood he cut from the back of the property and stone he pulled from the creek bed at the bottom of the hill. He wasn't a rich man, he was a patient one, and he always said the same thing whenever someone admired the place. He'd nod slowly and say, "Anything worth having takes longer than you want it to." I was 6 years old when we moved in. I grew up in that house. I learned to drive on that land. I buried my first dog under the oak tree near the south fence. I sat on that porch with my mother on the night she told me she was sick, and I sat on it again, alone, the morning after we buried her. That land wasn't just property to me, it was every version of myself I'd ever been. I spent 41 years working. Utilities management, not glamorous, not exciting, but steady. I gave that career everything it needed, and I saved carefully, the way my father taught me. And when I finally retired at 67, there was only one place in the world I wanted to go: home. My daughter Clara had been living in the farmhouse for the past 9 years. After my wife passed, I didn't have the heart to be there alone, and Clara said, she insisted, that she and Marcus would move in and keep the place going. Keep it in the family. I trusted that. I was grateful for it. I should have paid closer attention to which part of that arrangement Marcus was grateful for. Marcus is the kind of man who walks into a room and immediately calculates his position in it. Not in a threatening way. He's too smooth for that. He smiles easily, shakes hands firmly, uses your name a little too often. When we first met, I thought he was charming. By the 3rd year, I understood it wasn't charm. It was strategy. He had opinions about everything, about how the farm should be managed, which fields were wasted on gardening, whether it made financial sense to keep the old barn standing. He never said anything directly hostile. He just reframed things, constantly, turned history into inefficiency, turned sentiment into stubbornness. "You know, a man your age shouldn't have to worry about maintaining all this," he said to me once, about a year before I retired. I smiled. I thanked him for his concern. I said nothing else. But I heard it for what it was. When I announced I was retiring and coming back to the farm, I watched his face. Just for a second, just a flicker, before the smile returned. It was the face of a man recalculating. I filed that away. My first few months back were genuinely peaceful. I got up early. I walked the fields. I repaired the south fence, which had been leaning badly for 2 years. I planted along the east side of the house. I had conversations with neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years. I felt like myself again in a way I hadn't in a long time. Marcus was polite, careful. He'd come home from work, nod in my direction, ask surface-level questions about my day. Clara was warm, like always. My daughter has a generous heart. I've never doubted that. But she was also caught between two worlds in that house, and I could feel her stretching. I didn't push. I settled in. I let things breathe. And then, on a Tuesday evening in late October, I was in the barn. I wasn't doing anything that required much concentration, just sorting through some old equipment, thinking about what could be salvaged and what needed to go. The barn sits about 40 feet from the back of the house, and the window on the east side was cracked open because the afternoon had been warm. I wasn't eavesdropping. I wasn't looking for anything. I just heard him. Marcus, on the phone, in the kitchen, voice low but not low enough. The old man being there complicates the optics, but it doesn't change the math. The land is ours. We're selling it. I just need a few more months to manage the situation. I stood completely still. Yeah, set up the meeting. Don't come to the house yet. I'll handle the timing. I heard him move toward the back hallway, heard the conversation end, and I just stood there in the barn, in the quiet, with a wrench in my hand, listening to the sound of the fields. The land is ours. Those 4 words. I set the wrench down very carefully. I walked to the old wooden stool in the corner, the one my father built, and I sat on it, and I just breathed. I didn't feel rage exactly. What I felt was something older and quieter than rage. It was a kind of clarity, the kind that comes when something you suspected but hoped was wrong turns out to be exactly as wrong as you feared. He wasn't managing a home, he was managing a transaction, and I was the complication. I want to tell you what went through my mind in the days that followed, because it matters. It explains why I did what I did the way that I did it. I thought about confronting him, directly, sitting him down at the kitchen table and laying out exactly what I'd heard. I rehearsed it, honestly, had the whole conversation in my head more than once. But every time I got to the end of it, I saw the same thing. Marcus, calm, smiling, explaining that I must have misunderstood, that it was a theoretical conversation, that he was just exploring options, and of course nothing would happen without everyone's agreement. And Clara, standing nearby, wanting to believe him, hating that she was in the middle of it. I knew what a direct confrontation would produce: drama, denial, division, and no resolution. Because I had no proof of action yet, just words through a cracked window, so I made a different choice. I thought about my father, about the way he used to approach a problem on this farm, quietly, methodically, without wasted motion. He used to say that a man who reacts before he thinks gives his opponent the first move. I thought about all the times in my career I'd navigated situations by staying calm while others scrambled. I thought about what I actually had and what I could do with it. And then I stopped grieving, and I started working. The first thing I did was call my attorney, a woman named Patricia who I've trusted for over 20 years. She's sharp, careful, and she does not waste words. I told her the situation, everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Good thing you called now." See, here's what Marcus didn't know, and this is important. The farmhouse and the land were in my name. Solely. Always had been. My wife and I had kept it that way through careful estate planning years ago. When my wife passed, it transferred cleanly to me. Marcus and Clara had been living on the property. They had not been given the property. There was a meaningful difference between those two things, and Marcus had apparently chosen to skip over it in his planning. But, and this was the part that required careful thinking, without the right documentation in place, extended occupancy creates its own complications. Rights can accumulate over time. Situations can become legally murky if left unaddressed. Patricia told me what needed to happen, and I made it happen. Over the following 6 weeks, I was busy in ways that no one in that house noticed. Early morning calls before anyone was up. Meetings in town that I described when asked, as errands. Documents signed, notarized, and filed. A structure built, legally and financially, around the land, around the estate, around every piece of ground my father had ever touched. I established a formal land trust. I named Clara as a beneficiary because she is my daughter and I love her, and that was never in question. I put in place a series of conditions related to the property's use and transfer that were ironclad and specific. I also quietly had a conversation with the County Land Records Office, and I made sure that any inquiry about the property, any formal inquiry, would come with a notification. To me. I didn't tell Clara. I didn't tell Marcus. I just waited. It was a Thursday morning when my phone buzzed. A notification from the county system. A records inquiry had been made on my property. The requesting party was a development company, regional, medium-sized, the kind that buys agricultural land and turns it into housing developments or commercial lots. I knew the meeting Marcus had arranged had been confirmed. I went out to the porch, made coffee, watched the road, and I waited for the truck. It came about 40 minutes later, a newer truck, clean, with the development company's logo on the side, understated, professional. The driver was a man about 50, business casual, folder under his arm, that particular kind of walk that belongs to someone who does this regularly and expects it to go smoothly. My son-in-law met him at the end of the driveway. Marcus was dressed well. That tells you something about him. He dressed up for this, like it was already a celebration. He was shaking the developer's hand before the man had fully stepped out of the truck, smiling that wide, easy smile, gesturing at the fields, already presenting, already selling. I didn't move. I sat on the porch with my coffee and I watched. Marcus saw me. He glanced over once, early, and I could see the slight adjustment in his posture, a stiffening. He hadn't expected me to be on the porch. Or maybe he had, and he decided it didn't matter. He turned back to the developer and kept talking. After a few minutes, they began walking toward the house, toward me. Marcus kept his smile as they got closer, but his eyes were doing something different than his mouth. They were careful, reading me, trying to figure out which version of this situation he was in. "Morning," I said when they were close enough. "Morning," he said. "This is," and he said the developer's name, and he said it casually, like this was a normal introduction, like I was just a man on a porch who happened to be there. "He's looking at some land in the area. I was just showing him around." The developer put his hand out. I shook it. He had a good handshake. I didn't hold that against him. "Beautiful property," he said genuinely. "It is," I agreed. "Been in my family since 1967. A brief pause. "My family." I hadn't said our, I'd said my. Marcus kept his expression arranged. "Well, why don't we—" "Before we go any further," the developer said, and I noticed that he'd shifted slightly, that something professional had clicked on behind his eyes. "I want to make sure we're talking to the right people. This consultation was arranged by," and he looked at Marcus, "but I'll need to confirm ownership before we have a substantive conversation." Marcus smiled, nodded. "Of course, that's just standard." "The property is mine," I said. Calm, simple, just information. Solely. My name is on the deed, has been for decades. The developer looked at Marcus. Marcus's smile didn't fall, but it thinned. "I'll need to see documentation, of course," the developer said, in a tone that was now almost apologetic. "Of course," I said. "I can give you Patricia's number. She's my attorney. She can walk you through the full structure of the land trust that was finalized last month." That was the word that did it. Trust. The developer knew what that meant. The smile on Marcus's face did something complicated. It didn't disappear exactly. It just stopped making sense on his face, like a piece of clothing that no longer fit. "A land trust," the developer repeated. "Yes, formally established. The conditions on transfer are quite specific." I paused, sipped my coffee. I'm happy to have you speak with Patricia directly. She's expecting a call. There was a silence then, the particular kind of silence that lands when a room, or a driveway, understands that the plan and the reality are two entirely different things. The developer cleared his throat, looked at his folder, then at Marcus, then back at the property. "I think," he said carefully, "I may have been brought in prematurely." Marcus said something. I don't remember exactly what. Something about timing, about this being exploratory. But his voice had lost its shape. The architecture of his confidence had cracked somewhere in the middle, and what was coming out now was something smaller. The developer shook my hand again. He thanked me for my time. He told me the property was genuinely beautiful. Then he got in his truck and he drove back down the road, and he did not leave a card. Marcus and I stood in the driveway after the truck was gone. I didn't fill the silence. I've learned over the years that silence is most useful when you let the other person feel its full weight. Finally, he said, "I was just exploring options." I nodded slowly. "I know. I wasn't going to do anything without Marcus." Just his name. Not harsh, just a boundary. He stopped. "I've lived a long time," I said. "And I've learned that there's a difference between what people say they're going to do and what they've already set in motion." I looked at him evenly. I don't have any interest in an argument. I have no interest in drama, but I want you to understand something. I turned to look at the fields, at the south fence I'd repaired, at the oak tree where my dog was buried, at my father's house. This land has already outlasted everyone who ever thought it was theirs to decide about. I paused. It'll outlast this conversation too. Then I went inside. Clara found me in the kitchen about an hour later. She'd heard some of it, maybe more than some of it. Her eyes were red around the edges, not from crying exactly, but from the effort of not crying, which is its own kind of ache. She sat down across from me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I didn't know the full plan, Dad. I want you to know that." I looked at her. My daughter. The little girl who used to run through these fields in her rubber boots and call me from the barn when she found a bird's nest. The woman who sat with me through the hardest nights of my life without complaint. "I know," I said, and I meant it. "I knew he was thinking about the land differently than you do," she said quietly. I should have said something. I kept thinking it was just talk. I reached across the table and put my hand on hers. "Sometimes we protect the people we love longer than we should." She looked up at me. "What happens now?" "Nothing dramatic," I said. "You live here. You're my daughter. That doesn't change." I paused. "But some things have been made clearer about what this land is and what it isn't. And that clarity is good for everyone." She nodded slowly, with the look of someone sorting through complicated feelings about someone they love who has also let them down. I understood that look. I've worn it myself. Marcus didn't leave. I want to be honest about that, because the story that feels most satisfying is the one where the villain is banished and everything resets cleanly. But families aren't like that. They're messier and more durable. He was quiet for weeks, careful in a new way. Not the calculated carefulness of before, but something more unsettled. A man who has been caught doesn't carry himself the same way. He knows that someone else in the room now holds information he wished they didn't. We were never warm, but we moved around each other. Meals were had, mornings were survived. Claire and I grew closer again in ways that I hadn't realized we'd drifted. She started joining me on the morning walks, started asking questions about the farm. Real questions, interested ones, about the history of it, about what my father had built and why, about what I hoped for it. Those conversations meant more to me than I could easily say. I still sit on that porch most mornings. Coffee, the fields, the quiet. I think about my father sometimes, and I think he would have handled it differently. Probably more directly, fewer legal structures involved. He was a man of face-to-face confrontations and clear words. I respect that. It worked for his time. But I've learned a different lesson over my years. I've learned that the most effective thing you can do when someone underestimates you is let them finish. Let them build their plan all the way to the edge. And then, quietly, without drama, without anger, be the thing they didn't account for. I'm not angry at Marcus. I'm genuinely not. Anger would require me to believe that he had more power over this situation than he did. And he never did. Not really. He just thought he did, which is a different thing entirely. The land is still here. The oak tree is still here. The house my father built with stone from the creek bed is still standing, and it will be standing long after every plan Marcus made has been quietly folded up and put away. That's what I wanted him to understand in the driveway on that Thursday morning. Not that he lost, just that some things were never his to win. I'm 68 years old. I walk these fields every morning. I drink my coffee on the porch my father built. I watch the seasons turn over this land the way they've always turned, without anyone's permission, on their own schedule, following a logic older than any of us. Patience isn't passivity. I want to be clear about that. Patience is the long game. It's doing the quiet work before the noise starts. It's building your foundation while someone else is busy making plans on top of it. It's knowing when to speak and choosing, deliberately, to act instead. My father taught me that anything worth having takes longer than you want it to. He was right about that. He was right about most things that mattered. If this story reached you, if any part of it felt familiar, if you've ever had to choose between reacting and responding, I'm glad you stayed to the end. Leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what you would have done. And if this story earned your trust, the like button is right there, and subscribing means you won't miss what comes next. Take care of yourselves, and take care of what's yours.